We have Dr. Garth Andrus here today, and he's going to talk about why your organization is built to fail at AI and what to do about it. So we'll welcome to the stage Dr. Garth Andrus.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here with you. As he said, I'm Garth Andrus. I am the head of digital AI and organization transformation for Andersen Consulting. And just a quick bit of background I think might help because of the perspective that we're looking at today. I actually started my career as a professor of organizational science at Vanderbilt University and then at George Washington University. Did that for about 7 years and then came to Andersen Consulting, which became Accenture, and then moved over to Deloitte for the most of my career on the consulting side. So I went from the academic side to actually having to do it. I remember after about a year, I had been at the company, one of my leaders said to me, he said, "So you've been here a year now, what have you learned? Because you were a professor and all this." And I said, "I learned I didn't know anything." So the reality of being able to have to do this in companies has been, just being able to pair that together with the academic side has really been helpful. We've done a lot of research together with MIT. We wrote a book called The Technology Fallacy. It's in 7 languages now, printed in 2023. And some of this comes from some of that research of dozens and dozens and dozens of companies, as well as companies that we've done work for in this area. Companies like Meta, Twitter, Disney, J&J, Novartis, Walmart, Citibank, many others. So, first of all, I'm going to make sure I know how to run this thing. And I want you to take a look at this next picture we're going to show you. And just look at this and observe this for a second and just see what is it that you think would happen if this jet engine was actually turned on. I know we don't have microphones out there at this point, but we'll take questions at the end. But you can imagine what probably would happen to this. They turn that thing on, there's probably going to be a lot of shuddering, a lot of things falling apart and pieces falling off, and then it's probably going to take off by itself. And unfortunately, that's what happens to a lot of companies that try AI. They get this really powerful implementation of AI, and they stick it in the old way of doing work. And the next thing you know is it shudders and shakes and it sub-optimizes or just actually destroys the value of the AI that you're trying to put in. There's a reason why in the manufacturing area, just take it as an example, well actually overall, 85% of companies that implement AI 85% fail to actually achieve their business objectives that they had out for it. It's not because of the technology was bad, it's because of the organization is still in a pre-AI world. So before I go on to that, I just want to mention for those of you that are here that are providers, service providers, vendors of other companies, these things will really impact your business and the things that you can do. And so these are some of the ways you might be able to start to help your companies be able to take the value of what you're providing and be able to make sure that it gets to where it needs to get to, so it's not neutralized. And those of you who are in companies that are dealing with this and putting AI in or doing more with AI, same thing. These are the kinds of things that you can do to make some things happen. So, all right. So most companies really weren't built for AI. They were built in a pre-AI world. And, there's prioritization, predictability, control, mitigating risk, efficiency, cost management. All these things are basically what most organizations have had to do. With AI, everything's getting turned on its head. There's I call it tornadic activity, right? That just is, we all know that. We're all in this business. We know how this is changing so dramatically every day, and it's upsetting the organization. Think about that. When you put in AI, processes change, career paths change, skill needs change, structure needs to change, all these types of things to be able to keep up. So one example of that, which you're probably all familiar with, is Intel. And Intel used to be the leader in chip making. And their organization, I did have an opportunity to kind of do a little bit of work there at one point, but their organization was the very typical hierarchical, structural, everything's slow, very siloed, typical things. Well, what happened is NVIDIA didn't do that, right? They really went down a path of iterating and creating a structure that was super flexible and enabled them to actually become the leader. And you'll see what happened to Intel. They used to have 125,000 people in 2022, and now they have 75,000 people. Their stock was down 68% from its height. It's now starting to crawl back a little bit because people are investing in it and trying to make things change. But I do remember the outgoing CEO made a comment. He said, if we start today to catch up to where NVIDIA is, it will take us 4 years. Now, do you think NVIDIA is still going to be there in 4 years where they're at? No, they're going to be way on. So companies that don't change are going to have incredible issues, and we're already starting to see that. All right, so I talked about pre-AI. So the way we look at this is through the lens of DNA. And we've done a lot of research on this together with, like I said, MIT and others. And DNA of an organization is really how you organize work and your structures of work, and you organize the business, how you operate, all the operations, processes, and so forth, and then all the behaviors. Sometimes people call it culture, they don't know what else to call it, but it really is the DNA of a company. And the pre-DNA needs to be rewired to the new AI DNA, which is not an easy thing to do, and I'll show you a couple of examples in a minute. But we really risk that that synergy that we need to get out of AI by siloing. What happens a lot of times in transformation of AI, putting it in, you've probably all heard all the stories and seen it yourself. It gets into a pocket and it can do well in that pocket. As soon as you try to scale, the organization, the DNA of the organization kind of squashes it and pushes back on it because it's going to do everything it can to maintain that homeostasis that it has. So let's take a look at what are some of the pre-AI and AI DNA. So it's interesting, and I think important to know, at the very top here we have the dimensions. So the core assumptions really around pre-AI is about humans are the processors of information and technology is an enabler. It's been that way for many, many years. Where we're at with AI is the core intelligence partner, and tech is the operating model, the operating system. So quite a different way to look at things. So let's take a look at a few of these. So with structure, you have rigid hierarchies, functional silos. We see that. So give you an example. At Chevron, which used to just be across the way, but is now in Houston for most of what they do, has 14 levels of hierarchy from the entry-level person. So if you wanted to get your bosses, you can just keep going, right? The decisions that have to happen during that time period, and you're not going to move fast, are you? Now, to their credit, and I've actually done a lot of work there, to their credit, they actually are doing things to work around that with how they do decision rights and how decisions get made. You can change, without changing the structure, you can change who and how decisions get made, because one of the key things that AI does is democratize decision making. Because if you can't make, and by the way, democratize not just to people, but to machines. right? So it's a different way of really looking at this. So if you don't, this is the one thing that if you don't do right, none of the other stuff matters. Because if you can't democratize decision-making to machines and or people, then you're not going to be able to have the value of AI and what it can do for you. Then we look at workflows, things like linear stage gate, bottlenecks, and so forth, which we've seen with Boeing. That's been widely publicized. That's been their biggest challenge. Their pre-AI DNA is actually pre-DNA AI in a lot of ways because they're having a really hard time to making that work. A lot of companies we see in this category, in the pre-AI category still today, are like insurance companies, the big banks, a lot of the pharma companies, although they will do things in AI that are really amazing. They're not doing, the organization is not becoming more AI. And believe it or not, and I've worked with companies that are very small too, and even at some of the big tech companies around here where I've done work, they have a lot of pre-AI DNA. And sometimes when you start a new company, because that's what you knew, you layer back on some of these pre-AI DNA activities rather than the new design. So I'll just grab another one or two in here. Take learning. Learning's always been, let's go to classes and let's do this and that. Now learning really has to be tailored to the individual, fast, on demand, and consumable, right? That's really changed and is changing. And then governance, this is who can and who makes decisions and how decisions get made. With governance, you have, we all remember Nokia. Nokia used to be, good phone company as far as a handset and so forth for phones, and now really is pretty much out of that business and is in an infrastructure business. But a lot of assessment about what happened to them was their governance was too slow. They had so much in there about who could make decisions and when, it just stifled them. So there was a study just recently on manufacturing. It says 90% of manufacturers have piloted AI in some form, but only 17% have been able to implement it widely across the company. And again, it's about this DNA. A lot of times people say, who do you think is really making things happen over on this other side, on the AI era companies? Now, I'm going to give you some names, but they still have a lot of pre-AI DNA in them, but they're doing a lot to move this direction. It takes a little while to move a giant ship and turn it around. So some of these are like Unilever. They're doing a lot of really interesting and amazing things. So for example, with some of the software you can, that's out there today, you can continually look at they have lots of different companies that they operate, and they sell them and they buy them. So you want to look at that and say, what's the impact to my organization on the structure of the company? You can actually move with a lot of AI software today and move around headcount, look and see what the impact of cost is, and so forth on that. One of the things I'll say, I'm going to jump back to job design for 1 second. This is another one of those absolutely incredible areas of change. We have had jobs and job descriptions forever, and they're pretty static for the most part, aren't they? And they're static because jobs didn't change that much. And what's happening with AI, jobs are changing constantly. And you need this constant iteration of the job. The job has become nimble. And when you think about AI agents in the mix now, you've got pieces of that. It's becoming, AI agents are becoming a pseudo coworker, right? So how do you do that? How do you manage that workforce planning that you would do? Typically, you've got to account for machines. You've got to account for jobs that we have today that need to continually change. So those are a couple of areas now. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. Switch over. Okay, so I worked 3 years at Coca-Cola on a project. The CFO told me, he said, I lived in Atlanta at the time, and he said, Garth, he was walking with me, he turned around in the hallway, and he said, you're going to be here for a while. So he said, you won't drink anything other than a Coca-Cola product as long as you're working here, right? And I said, yes, sir. But this is Pepsi. A different example. Coca-Cola is actually one of these that's making a lot of moves, and so is Pepsi. So they've been doing a lot with demand forecasting, product innovation, store-level optimization using AI. They're doing a lot of stuff. Again, Coca-Cola is doing the same. But they have a lot of strengths in this sort of AI era strength area. So they're embedding these into their systems and processes. And they're doing a lot. They're actually making a lot of headway here. But some of the things they have some pre-AI DNA clashes still that goes on. They've got, they've got a large hierarchy. They have over 300,000 employees. So it's really difficult to make those kinds of changes. But the cultural inertia, the reliance on siloed and static dashboards and legacy approaches. And I'll bring up dashboards a couple of times because I think we're really moving away from dashboards to something else, which I'll talk to you at the very end. And that can actually make this process work even better. So these are some of the challenges that they're having, but they are doing it. And that's what you got to hand it to them. They're taking a concentrated effort to go about this. Now, what about a smaller company that, this company, I don't know if you've heard of this. Raise your hand if you've seen this company, Gourmet Delights. They're an Australian company. Has everybody ever heard of them? I hadn't heard of them until just recently. But they're doing a lot of really amazing things. Now, they only have 210 employees. But they do really, really well. They're really financially viable. But they've been doing some things like, robotics, cobots, different automation. They're doing a lot with energy-efficient systems and solar-powered ovens and things like this. So they're trying to make some things happen. But even this small company still has pre-AI DNA that really is getting in the way. And some of those things are their customer engagement's very siloed, and between their wholesale and retail, because it's been that way, and it's been hard for them to change that. Their governance relies on trust in specific individuals, and if that individual, and that just has to do with reputation and so forth, but they could be putting in more of a governance approach that's going to work no matter what they do. So the net effect here is that they're making some bold AI reinvention, trying to make some things happen. So you got to hand it to them, and I wanted to give you two different views of a large company and a tiny company. Still struggle with the same things. So now, what do we do about it, right? We've kind of already hit this, so I'm just going to move on, but I'll say one thing. A lot of people say, oh, we just need to do change management. So change management is necessary but not sufficient for AI transformation. It is not, and this is the key thing to always remember, AI is not a technology implementation. AI is a transformation of the business using technology. So quite a different approach to that. Because if you come in and you just try to get people to adopt, that's not going to be enough. All right, so what do you do about it? So we're going to take a look at the left-hand side there. I don't know if you can see it well. So this is a model that we created, and it's also something we use every day in helping companies move from one side to the other. So there's 12 areas of DNA that are lined up to the areas that I mentioned: operate, organize, and behave, right? There's 4 in each one of these things, like structure, process, technology, governance, leadership, performance management and measurement, your policies, your physical locations, how you handle remote, off-site, and hybrid. All those types of things really are core. This is what makes the DNA. This is the double click, and then you can see the double click on the double click. And what we do is look at a company and go through the process of doing a North Star. And this gets you away from the fragmentation that happens with a lot of AI implementation, where you just say, here's what we're going to do, and we go do it, and then we can't scale it, and we wonder why we can't. We can't because the DNA of the organization is kind of smothering it and trying to keep it from getting bigger. But in this, what we can do is have this North Star vision, and we call it an AI-business vision. Because if you look at AI in a silo, you're not going to get the business component. And if you just look at the business component, you're going to miss the AI. So if you look at this and say, all right, what are you trying to do as a business? And what are your objectives? And how can AI actually address those objectives? So this is where it gets really interesting. We show this, we actually take this blueprint right here, and each one of those boxes is blown out into detail, and says, okay, if that's what you want to be, here's what your DNA looks like. Your structure looks like this, your policies look like this, your leadership actions look like this, and so on from all 12 of these areas. And we'll look at either high, medium, or low impact on some of these, because maybe locations, maybe they're all co-located, so it's not as big a deal. But in other places, co-locations, outside of the US and around the world all create all sorts of other challenges. So we do that, and their first thought is we bring this back to them, we give an overall view of it, and then we say to them, here's what you would look like if you did this. And usually it's shock. They're like, that doesn't look anything like we look like today. And they realize, wow, how far they are from that. And we usually do an assessment to figure out where they are today against those dimensions, and be able to get that delta, and then we look and see how we can help them get there through making what we call minimum viable changes. And we create these little swarms. They're really tight, measurable changes in small areas within that DNA, usually the double clicks on that DNA. And then we go into that. Also, we adjust the double clicks where the bullets are, depending on the type of the organization. This is the generic view. If you go into a tech company, you change those up. If you go into a life sciences company where I'm working right now, you change that up. All right, so that's how we end up doing that. And then we do these minimum viable changes, but you look at this thing from the whole view. Now, people say, I can't always do that with a big company, but what we usually can do is do it with a function. So when you have a function that still works kind of insular to itself, you can make a lot happen there. But we've done it with the entire company through the CEO, and also maybe with the CFO in their function, or in a business unit, and so forth. And that's the best way to get started. It's always best to start with a win, so we always look at where is the most likely of success, and do we have a champion and a leader pool who's actually supporting and enabling that. These things really help change things. All right, so we're probably not going to have a lot of time for questions because I have one more slide and I want to share that with you. But I'll come out at the end if anybody wants to chat about anything. So I'm giving you a little bonus, like how do you stoke this thing? How do you throttle this up? And make it happen faster. So what we're starting to do now is doing digital twins of the organization. Now, you're probably pretty familiar with digital twins in a factory. So if you look at Tesla, you look at Andersen and all those, if you've ever seen videos of them, they've got control towers. It looks like NASA, right? You've got all these controls and everything. You can make changes to it. You can see the supply chain and all that. This is the same concept, but applied to all the things we were just talking about. All the organizational components, all the operational components, and all the behavioral components. We can link into all those. We can link into sentiment in the organization. We can link into the chats. We can link into all those different pieces and bring back actual, real data that's happening right now, and then be able to, with some of these, they actually will give you the direction and answer. So the quick example I'll give you is with an insurance company we're working with. they have a chief underwriting officer who has dozens and dozens of underwriters, and every decision those underwriters make, I thought it was all like cut and dried. It's not. There's a lot of judgment involved in this. They can cost the company millions and millions of dollars by even one little tweak mistake. So we're building a digital twin of the chief underwriting officer, and then bringing in all the different projects they've done before that were successful and non-successful. And in the flow of work, while the underwriter's working, it'll prompt them and say, have you thought of this? Here's how I would look at that. And then you can also go ask the question, and it will give that to you. So what you're doing is you're accelerating the expertise of these underwriters, you're capturing the knowledge of that expert, and you're also making sure that you've got, it continuously learns. So you can keep going that way. Okay, we're just about out of time, but you can do this, as I mentioned, with the org design, where you can actually click and move and things in the organization and be able to calculate cost and so forth. The one thing that I think is just so interesting and different now is AI agents and how that's just changing so much. And I think that's one of the easiest ways for companies to get involved with AI is to do some small agents, because you can immediately see how it changes workflow, how it changes process, how it changes the work structure and those types of things. But anyway, I hope this has been helpful. We're out of time. Thanks for being here, and happy to chat afterwards. Thanks.